Morning, everyone. I am passing out Jolly Ranchers candies. You'll find out why later. If you don't want one, you don't have to have them. You don't gain any merit by having a piece of candy. We good? All right. So, the 4 articles that the Founding Master lays out for us to develop in our practice are faith, zeal, questioning, and dedication. I want to talk about questioning today. And the reason I want to talk about questioning is the head Dharma Master USA, the Venerable Juksan Ni, said something about questioning that really got my mind moving. Earlier this month, we had a national Sangha gathering, and he took some questions from members. And one of the members asked a question about questioning. And he said something that I think is really profound and fascinating. He said, questioning connects the phenomenal world to that which is beyond the phenomenal. With only our normal, rational way of thinking, we cannot experience that world of non-duality, the truth behind phenomena. So, this practice of questioning really helps us to break through our normal ways of thinking to go beyond the phenomenal world. The first line of the Ilwan Song talks about Ilwan being the realm of samadhi beyond all words and speech. I used to think that meant you can't talk about it. But as the scripture we heard this morning mentions, that to think you can't talk about it is a great illness. You should be able to describe its head or its tail, even though it has no head nor tail. It really always boggles my mind. So there's that gap between the phenomenal truth and the ultimate absolute truth. And the way we think about the world and ourselves has that same gap. If the truth is beyond words and speech, meaning it's beyond intellectual, analytical, rational thought, how do we get there? How do we use questioning to connect ourselves to the truth? So that's the core of my practice. When I was in 3rd or 4th grade, I don't remember when, I had my first Jolly Rancher candy. And it was the green one. I picked the green one on purpose, because that's the first one I ever had. And it like blew my mind. I had no idea what candy could be until I ate one of these guys. Who has had a Jolly Rancher candy? Oh yeah. So, if you've had a green Jolly Rancher candy, how do you describe what it tastes like? It's like nothing in nature. I spent all my life trying to describe how it tastes. When I tasted it, I was like very much into like the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. So I said to myself, oh, this is superhero candy. This is like candy that's been radioactive, gamma rays, and took an apple and turned it into this incredibly super sweet and sour, and that's what it is. And I like that description. But if you haven't had a Jolly Rancher candy, does that get you to what that tastes like? No, it's complete gibberish. So, if you have a candy and if you would like, unwrap it and think for a minute. If you haven't had one, imagine what it tastes like based on what I just said. If you have had one, remember what it tastes like. Now put it in your mouth and taste it. Oh. It's been years. Think about for a minute the difference between what you were thinking about when I was describing the taste and what you're experiencing right now. Even more important, as I'm doing this now, I realize this doesn't taste like it did when I was in 3rd grade. Is the candy different? Am I different? Are we both different? I can't talk the whole time that way. So, to me, that embodies the difference between our thinking minds trying to get there and getting there. How does questioning bridge that gap that Chuksan was talking about? When I first started practicing, I practiced for years studying hard. I read Thich Nhat Hanh, I read blah, 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 bum, 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 and I thought I was getting somewhere. And then I came here, and I really had a structure to practice and meditate and use all the methods: inquiry, cultivation, choice, and action. It changed me. I realized that what I was doing was not practicing, it was studying. Someone described it once as doing it that way is like going into a restaurant, reading the menu, not ordering anything, and then complaining because you're hungry. Like the candy. If I spent all my time asking, who makes the candy? Where does it come from? How is it shipped to the stores and distributed? How do they decide what price to charge? I'm never going to figure out what it tastes like. I've got to just taste it. So I tend to think of the questions I ask as reading the menu questions and eating the darn meal questions. I don't want to spend my entire life reading the menu, asking only the menu questions, and never asking the tasting questions. I have no idea what I just said, so let's try to, let's move into some ideas about what it is. So basically we have different kinds of knowledge. We've got data, we've got information, and we have knowledge. Data is just things, 911. Knowledge is, information is some kind of context to it. 911, if I say it 911, that's a phone number, that's what you call when it's emergency. That becomes knowledge. If I say 9/11, uh-oh, that's something a little different. Our mind goes to the Twin Towers. That's also information. So data is just out there. We bring it in. It's passive. When we put context to it, our minds can then create a piece of information out of it, and then we connect two things, 911 emergency, I need to take action, that's knowledge. But that's where the gap happens. Where do we get, how do we get to wisdom? Wisdom is the tasting. Wisdom is the making it real in the world. It's a different kind of question. And I think the key is uncoupling the questions from the answers. Menu questions are questions that have answers. How was that fish cooked? Where did it come from? How much do I get? Is it a big portion? So the questions we need to answer to gain insight, that next step toward wisdom, are the questions that may not have answers, or questions that have answers that are constantly changing, like the taste of this candy has changed over my life. Doesn't mean the taste I had when I was in 3rd grade is wrong. It just means it's not the same taste that I had now. They're both good, but they're different. To be able to release the questions from an answer and to begin to be comfortable with asking questions that have no answer or have shifting answers is, I think, the key for me to gain insight. So, it's not to say that the menu questions aren't important. You know, skillful means, reading scripture, Dharma discussions, asking teachers, listening to people like me blab at you, they have value. But the value stops at some point. And we need to click over into that tasting questions mind. And I think that's the realm of mind study. I think the way to get there is to stop looking outside to bring data in, turning it into information, turning it into knowledge, but begin to turn inward and have insight into the workings of our mind. Questions without answers, questions with answers that change all the time. So what kinds of questions are those? Koans is the first thing that comes to my mind. I'm not going to go into the details about how to practice koans right now. It's a real personal thing. You got to do it to do it. Maybe if we have time for Q&A afterwards, we can sort of talk a little bit about koans. But the thing about koans that I will say is, like putting that piece of candy in your mouth, that first moment, boom, it does something to you. Your mind and body go, oh! And that's the beauty of the koan. What you do after that is completely up to you. But I think the point of the koan is not to get an answer, but it's that first moment, I'm out of kilter for a moment. My mind is now forced to kind of reflect on itself for a second. What's happened? What is this? And then what you do with that moment, whether you press it or leave it, is up to you. There's also something to contemplation versus thinking. It's very hard for me for a long time to uncouple my idea of doing this from the thinking mind. I'm understanding that there's another way my mind can work, and people call it contemplation. Again, I can't define that for you. Everyone contemplates in their own way, and we can maybe talk about that later if there's time. But to me, contemplation is opposite of the analytical thought. When we think about something, we tend to stop it, pull it apart, see the pieces apart, and try to make something out of it. For me, contemplation is a passive moment of mind where things that are maybe separated can be put together into something new. And we go, oh. I don't know how you can do that. I know how I do that. But to me, it's a synthesis. Two things that are separate, maybe you don't even think about them, but just out of nowhere, they come together and you go, oh, a little awakening. Contemplation begets awakening, not answers. I think of the thinking mind and the contemplative mind is different in this way. If you think of the world as things, you can analyze them and pull them apart. If you understand the world as a process, you have to contemplate it, because you can't understand a process by stopping it. You have to ride with it and experience the process to understand it. So you can't stop it and pull it apart and gain any insight into it. Basically, when you're stopping the process, pulling it apart, you're doing an autopsy on a dead moment. So I think of contemplation as my mind riding with reality and truth right now and seeing what comes of it. Another part of the mind study questioning I think is really important is that questions tend to limit our minds if we're talking about thinking questions. Mind study does not pose questions that limit the mind. Mind study poses questions that expose the mind. When I think of, I had this habit for years, and Desi pointed it out to me, and I've been working on it for a long time. I used to ask questions in binary form all the time. Do you want to do this? You want to do that? Well, we could da-da-da-da, or you could do this. And then how about this? Or do you, would you do? It was always two things. And those questions were putting the world into a structure, and then dividing the structure into duality, and then make a choice. So my questions were controlling the answer by creating boxes you had to choose from. My mind was clearly in that structure, or I wouldn't be asking the questions that way. So by becoming aware of my binary questions, I realized my mind is binary. If I stop asking binary questions, maybe my mind will relax and spread. So there's the mind study in analyzing the nature of my question. There's no answer there, but it gives me insight into how my mind works and let me ease it out and change my mind, which is the whole point of mind study. So I really pay close attention to the kinds of questions I ask, because it tells me what state of mind I'm in. It's kind of like when you play 20 questions. In the version I used to play when I was a kid, the first question was always, is it animal, vegetable, or mineral? And what that does is it forces the answer to be, well, it's animal, or it's vegetable, or mineral. And so you're structuring your mind, you're structuring the question, and the game plays out within the limits of that structure. But of course, we know there are a lot of things that are not animal, vegetable, or mineral, and the game blows up because the options become so vast you can't actually guess anything. But anyway, that's the mind study part of questioning for me. The last part is meditation. And meditation is, in my mind, a question. Sometimes meditation just comes down to, what's it like to be right here, right now? And there's no answer to that, and certainly not a set answer. It changes every moment. Every moment is different. So in my mind, questioning is the core to everything. It just depends on what kind of question I am asking in the moment. Bong Kil Chung, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that name. He's a scholar. I think he's at Miami University still. And he did a translation of the scriptures of Won Buddhism. And it's fun to read his version sometimes because he uses very different words. And he doesn't do questioning. He uses the word doubt. And I love that because when I think of doubt, I think of skepticism and shifting and subversive. It's got a flavor, there's a taste to it that's appealing. And I think it appeals to me because in a sense that's what mind study is. That's what insight is and how to get to wisdom. It's subversive. Its aim is to undermine the foundation of our ego minds so that it can't endure. I'm going to read this because it's important to me. Mind practice undermines our own ego from controlling us and protects us from the ego mind of others, the political ego mind, the economic ego mind, the social ego mind. Mind study is subversive, and it's good for that reason. Questioning can be anything you want it to be if you just understand how your mind works and what kind of work you need to do on your mind. These mind study questions are the tasting questions. They're not the menu questions. The tasting questions of mind practice turn our attention away from external answers, directs them internally. Our questions become uncoupled from pat answers and become tools that we use to root out assumptions, forms, attachments, discriminations, and habits that shackle our mind and frees us from those shackles. The other thing to remember is tasting questions have to be repeated over and over again because your mind changes over and over, always. One time, I was sitting with Reverend Kim in a mind study class, and sometimes I just get tired of hearing the threefold study and the 4 articles. It's just over and over and over again. And I asked a question. It wasn't really a question. I said, don't you get tired of telling us the same thing over and over again? And I was really telling her, I'm tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. And she looked at me and she said, not at all. Because you are different every time. And that was a great lesson to me. Everything doesn't have to be new every time. There's benefit in repeating over and over again. So I'll talk about wisdom for a moment. Wisdom, prajna paramita. Don't worry about that word. Just think of wisdom as being the ability to take the insight you gain and make it real in the world. Wisdom is knowledge and insight put into action. And questioning is not only the bridge that gets us to the ultimate truth. We have to constantly call into question each of our beliefs and assumptions in every moment so that we see each moment with that mirror wisdom of no mind. We can use our questioning nature to root out each and every attachment and discrimination and bring it under the light of our inner wisdom and watch it dissolve in that light. When we use our questioning mind in this way, we foster a mind that abides nowhere, even when in action, as the Founding Master says. In doing that, we bring that wisdom into the world through mindful choice in action. And in those moments when we do that, we close that circle of the Il-Won-San vow. We go from that beginning where it's beyond all words and speech. We've experienced it and made it real in the world, and therefore we have embodied the Il-Won-San vow, and we've closed the circle with ourself as the closure point. There are some philosophers and scientists that have theorized that consciousness is a fundamental component of the universe. They say that the universe seeks to understand itself through marvelous existence. In that way, each and everything that arises is a question that the universe is posing to itself in order to understand itself. The universe created physicists in order to understand itself through mathematics. The universe created musicians in an effort to understand itself through music. The universe created mythology, books, and Netflix in an effort to understand itself through stories. Parents help us understand the universe through compassion. Fellow beings help us understand the universe through cooperation. The universe created each and every one of you in an effort to understand itself through your consciousness. Your spiritual practice is the universe asking itself PhD-level questions about itself. So I would encourage you to ask yourself, if I am a question created by the universe to understand itself, what should I do? And always ask yourself, am I just reading the menu, or am I eating the meal? Thank you.